I've never reviewed a Borderlands game before, so just before I start talking about Borderlands 3, let me talk a little about my experience with the franchise so far. I first played the first Borderlands game with a mate back in the days of the PlayStation 3, and both of us really enjoyed the irreverent humour and the way the loot works the same way as Diablo 2, which we had recently played together. A few years later, we played 2, and a few years after that, the pre-sequel. Though we both agreed that the story was gradually declining in quality, we nonetheless enjoyed the mechanics enough to keep going. I had heard that the Borderlands games were nowhere near as much fun solo, and several years after playing the pre-sequel, I found out firsthand, as I decided, in my infinite wisdom, to stream Borderlands 2 solo. Solo, Borderlands 2 was an entirely different, altogether more annoying experience, as the enemies felt like they were balanced for co-op play. And if I was downed, unless I was able to somehow finish an enemy, I was forced back to a checkpoint that was often miles away. If I had a teammate, they would have been able to revive me. A big reason I mention this, aside from setting the scene a little, is to explain that I played Borderlands 3 co-op with someone who knows the game well. I therefore cannot speak for its balancing while solo. I did consider playing it solo for the purpose of this review, but for reasons I believe I'm about to make clear, I don't see that happening. I should also mention, for the purpose of this review, I only played the base game and not the DLCs, which I understand have a different feel. But with that out of the way, my very first impression of Borderlands 3 was of bemused annoyance, as once again, the tutorial is made by Claptrap, one of the most annoying characters in modern video games. Since the second game came out, I've always been kind of confused why the developers feel the need to start off every game with such a frustrating experience. Claptrap is supposed to be funny, but rarely succeeds to be anything more than annoying. In the older games, his segments were pretty long, or at least felt like it, but eventually would mercifully end, and the rest of the characters were much better. Even more mercifully, the Claptrap segment, and therefore the tutorial, felt pretty short in 3, so my next impression of Borderlands 3 was honestly of being impressed. It quite quickly became apparent that although the mechanics are more or less exactly the same as the previous games, everything had been given the metaphorical zhuzh it needed to feel incredibly tight and satisfying. The rework of the legendary system, making them far less rare, not only makes attaining fun and interesting guns pretty easy, many of them have unique mechanics or awesome bonuses that make pulling the trigger extremely satisfying. And that's without the awesome haptic feedback on the PS5, as I played this on PC with an Xbox One controller. Something I didn't like in the older games was how much walking around you had to do, either running all the way back to the action after dying, or, even worse, walking back to a fast travel point having completed an objective. Borderlands 3 has fixed this by again zhuzhing up the mechanic, allowing one to fast travel from anywhere and allowing the player to use their vehicle as a fast travel point. This not only is incredibly convenient when playing co-op with that annoying friend who always gets lost or lags behind, that friend is me by the way, but also must provide a very useful and customizable waypoint for a solo player. The bosses felt really easy, to be honest, so long as both players had legendary guns. In fact, the whole game felt pretty easy, but then I did play it co-op on normal difficulty with someone who knew where to get all the best weapons, so I feel like that's not on the game. And hopefully this means it's less frustrating for a solo player. The side missions were passable, most being samey, but provided an adequate excuse to continue shooting perps in the face, with one or two more unique missions that stand above the rest. For example, a mission where you must essentially become the game's Uber Eats driver and deliver food before a timer runs out. Actually, maybe that's a bad example, as that mission is a little annoying, but it's certainly unique and memorable. So, the gameplay and guns are an improvement on the older games. Let's talk now about the story and the characters. I said earlier that it was a mercy when the Claptrap segment ended because he is, quote, supposed to be funny but rarely succeeds to be anything more than annoying, unquote. Unfortunately, that mercy is very short-lived in Borderlands 3, because I'm sorry to say that in actual fact, the vast majority of the characters, no actually scratch that, the entirety of the game is supposed to be funny but rarely succeeds to be anything more than annoying. The main antagonist is a lass called Tyreen, who, in the story, is a streamer. The fact she is a streamer isn't really important to the plot, it just makes her really annoying. They are obviously trying to make her an annoying streamer type, but the annoying factor is honestly so overtuned, it's almost funny. It kind of feels like the story writers are trying to make some meta-social commentary with the character, but it's so heavy-handed, it falls flat. The whole character feels kind of like it was written by a teenager who thinks they are the funniest and cleverest writer in the world, while really all it succeeds in being is really cringe. And unfortunately, it's not just Tyreen that is annoying. Fans of the game probably already have the name Ava in mind. And the cringe doesn't stop there either. The irreverent humour I mentioned at the start has reached such a peak in Borderlands 3 that more often than not, it's just really, really lame. For every time I laughed at the dialogue, I honestly rolled my eyes or cringed at least 3 or 4 times. It kind of has a similar energy to when a parent or teacher tries to use the kids lingo to be down with the kids. Cringe isn't limited to certain characters either. Pretty much every character has some moment that is supposed to be funny and flies way off the mark. The story really doesn't make a huge amount of sense if you think too hard about it. The main antagonist has every opportunity to easily murder you and or other major characters, but doesn't because plots, I guess? And even worse, when she does finally decide she's had enough of you, there is very little narrative preamble, and suddenly and inexplicably, she's lost the majority of her powers that make you an easy kill for her. Then you kill her, but the world is still ending, and one of the characters just goes, "No," and floats off. Sad music starts, and the implication is that the character just sacrificed themselves to save the world. But there wasn't even a hint that that character could do that? Deus Ex Machina for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? So, while the gameplay is an improvement, and is very satisfying to experience, the story and characters suck. I think, honestly, the irreverent humour thing has run its course, and I'm glad to hear that Borderlands 4 is a more serious experience, because this isn't it. Oh, and don't get me started on this game's version of Sanctuary. It being a spaceship is awesome thematically, but its design sucks. It's really confusing and not fun to navigate. I'm grateful for the time I spent with my friend, and if you already love the gameplay of the Borderlands games but don't care about story, then this game is for you. Otherwise, I'd steer well clear of Borderlands 3.
So who's the brat? You I get, but what's her deal?